The ancient stone hummed with energy that made Dr. Kira Thorne's instruments go wild. She knelt in the dirt of Terra 7, a dead world that should have been empty for millions of years, yet here she was staring at architecture that defied everything she knew about galactic history. The ruins stretched across the barren landscape like the skeleton of some impossible city, built with precision that made modern construction look crude by comparison. Her research team had been excavating for 3 months now, and each day brought discoveries that shouldn't exist. The carbon dating results came back consistently wrong, showing dates that predated known civilization by tens of thousands of years. The technology embedded in the walls used principles that current science barely understood. Most disturbing of all, the proportions of everything from doorways to stairs suggested builders who stood exactly like the humans, everyone dismissed as primitive newcomers to the galaxy. Kira's assistant, a young Altarian named Vel, approached with another impossible artifact. The device looked like a data storage unit, but it was made from materials that hadn't been invented yet. When they tried to scan it, the device responded by projecting a holographic star map that showed the current galaxy with perfect accuracy, including systems that weren't discovered until the last century. "Professor, we need to report this to the Council," Vel said, his multiple eyes blinking nervously. "These findings could change everything we know about galactic history." Kira stood up, brushing the alien dust from her knees. She had been dreading this moment. The Galactic Council would not want to hear what she had found. For thousands of years, the established order had been built on the understanding that the Mantari were the eldest race, the first to achieve spaceflight, the founders of galactic civilization. The idea that some unknown species had built cities and mapped stars before the Mantari even evolved would shake the foundations of galactic society. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every test, every analysis, every piece of data pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Someone had been here first, someone who built with human proportions and left behind technology that made current science look like children playing with sticks. The journey to Harmony's Edge, the Galactic Council's orbital station, took 2 weeks. Kira spent the time preparing her presentation, knowing she would face skepticism and hostility. The council members represented 12 species, each proud of their place in galactic history. None of them would welcome news that overturned everything they believed about their origins. The council chamber was a vast sphere designed to accommodate the different environmental needs of its members. Kira stood in the center, surrounded by beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Elder Vreth of the Mantari dominated the assembly, his crystalline form gleaming under the chamber's lights. The Void Runners floated in their environmental suits while the plant-like Sylvans swayed gently in their atmospheric pods. "Dr. Thorne," Elder Vreth's voice resonated through the chamber like breaking glass. "You claim to have found evidence of a pre-galactic civilization. This is an extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence." Kira activated her holographic projector. The chamber filled with images of the Terra 7 ruins, three-dimensional reconstructions that showed the impossible scale and sophistication of the ancient city. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as the representatives saw buildings that dwarfed their own greatest achievements. "The ruins cover an area larger than most modern cities," Kira explained. "The architecture shows advanced understanding of materials science, quantum mechanics, and dimensional engineering. The builders used techniques we're only beginning to understand." She showed them the artifacts, each one more impossible than the last. Energy sources that still functioned after 50,000 years. Data storage devices that contained more information than entire planetary archives. Construction materials that seemed to bend the laws of physics. "This proves nothing," Elder Vreth interrupted. "These could be remains of any advanced species. Why do you suggest they're connected to the humans?" Kira had been waiting for this question. She activated another set of holographic displays showing detailed measurements of the ruins. Every doorway, every staircase, every piece of furniture was built for beings of human height and proportions. The mathematical ratios matched human anatomy with precision that couldn't be coincidental. "Furthermore," Kira continued, "we found these symbols carved into the foundation stones. The holograms showed intricate markings that covered the ancient walls. Most were in an unknown script, But scattered throughout were symbols that made the assembly gasp in recognition. They were clearly related to the primitive writing systems found on human worlds. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. The plant-like sylvans rustled their leaves in agitation. The aquatic depths dwellers bubbled angrily in their tanks. The very idea that humans, the species everyone considered galactic newcomers, might be connected to this ancient civilization was almost unthinkable. Impossible, Elder Vreth declared. Humans are a young species. They only achieved spaceflight recently. They have no technology beyond what they've learned from us. They're primitives who barely understand the most basic principles of galactic civilization. Kira played her final card. The holographic display showed the ancient star map in its full glory, a perfect representation of the galaxy as it existed today. Every star, every nebula, every major astronomical feature was marked with precision that exceeded current galactic surveys. Most shocking of all, the map included detailed information about planets that hadn't been discovered until centuries after humans supposedly first left their homeworld. This map was created at least 50,000 years ago, Kira said quietly. It shows knowledge of the galaxy that exceeds our current understanding. The builders knew about systems we've only recently explored, planets we've only recently colonized. They mapped the entire galaxy when our species were still evolving on our homeworlds. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Representatives who had spent their entire lives believing in their species' superiority now faced evidence that challenged everything they knew. If this ancient civilization was connected to humans, then humans weren't the primitive newcomers everyone thought they were. They might be the descendants of the galaxy's first and greatest civilization. Elder Vreth's crystalline form seemed to dim as he processed the implications. This requires further investigation. We cannot accept such claims without additional evidence. But even as he spoke, Kira could see doubt in the eyes of the other representatives. The evidence was too strong to ignore, too detailed to dismiss. Somewhere in the galaxy's forgotten past, someone had built cities that dwarfed modern achievements and mapped stars with impossible accuracy. And everything suggested that someone was human. As the assembly dispersed, Kira knew that her discoveries would soon spread throughout the galaxy. The carefully maintained order of galactic civilization, built on the assumption of Mentari superiority and human primitiveness, was about to crumble. The truth about humanity's past was emerging from the ruins of Terra 7, and nothing would ever be the same again. The drilling equipment screamed as it hit something that shouldn't exist 3 kilometers beneath Ashara's surface. Dr. Alex Reed had been searching for mineral deposits when his deep core samples came back with readings that made no sense. Instead of rock and metal, the drill had struck what appeared to be processed materials, artificial structures buried under millions of tons of sediment. Alex had been working the rim worlds for 15 years, cataloging geological formations and mapping mineral resources for the Terran Survey Corps. He was used to finding the unexpected, but this was different. The energy readings from the deep samples showed active power sources that had been running continuously for an impossibly long time. Whatever was down there was not only artificial but still functioning. The excavation took 6 weeks. Alex worked alone, keeping his discovery secret from the Survey Corps and the local colonial authorities. Something told him this was bigger than a routine mineral survey, something that needed to be handled carefully. As his automated diggers carved through layer after layer of compressed earth, he began to realize just how old the buried structure really was. The entrance appeared suddenly, revealed when the last layer of sediment fell away. It was a doorway, made of materials that looked like metal but felt warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with internal light. The proportions were human standard, built for someone of Alex's exact height and build. More disturbing still, the door opened at his approach, responding to his presence with technology that shouldn't exist. Inside, Alex found himself walking through corridors that stretched far beyond what should have been possible given the size of the excavation. The walls were covered with displays that activated as he passed, showing information in languages he had never seen but somehow understood. The facility was enormous, a complex of chambers and laboratories that extended deep into the planet's core. The central archive was a chamber filled with crystalline storage devices that hummed with barely contained energy. When Alex approached the main console, it responded immediately to his touch, projecting holographic displays that made his breath catch in his throat. He was looking at star charts that showed the galaxy as it existed millions of years ago, complete with notations about stellar evolution, planetary formation, and the development of life on thousands of worlds. But the real shock came when he accessed the historical records. The archive contained the complete history of a galactic civilization that spanned millions of years, a civilization built and led by humans who had achieved technologies that made current science look primitive. The records showed vast cities, on hundreds of worlds, space-based habitats that housed billions, and exploration fleets that had mapped every corner of the galaxy. These weren't the primitive humans that current galactic society knew. These were beings who had mastered faster than light, travel when other species were still evolving. They had built the hyperlane networks that all current space travel depended on. They had established the fundamental principles of galactic trade, communication, and law that still governed interstellar society. They had been teachers and guides to younger species, helping them develop spaceflight and join the galactic community. Alex spent hours absorbing the information, learning about a human civilization that had thrived for eons before mysteriously disappearing. The records showed technological achievements that seemed impossible even by current standards. Humans had built machines that could manipulate matter at the quantum level, create energy from empty space, and even travel between parallel dimensions. But then the records took a darker turn. Alex found himself reading about an enemy that had emerged from beyond normal space. Entities called the Devourers that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very structure of reality itself. The war against them had lasted for centuries, with entire star systems being erased from existence as the battle raged across multiple dimensions. The humans had finally found a way to stop the Devourers, but the cost had been enormous. To seal the dimensional rifts that allowed the creatures access to normal space, they had to sacrifice their entire civilization. The process required not just advanced technology, but genetic modifications that would allow humans to maintain the seals. Across thousands of generations, the final records were the most shocking of all. The humans had voluntarily suppressed their own technological knowledge and ancestral memories, scattering across the galaxy to live as apparently primitive societies while maintaining their vigil against the Devourers. They had become their own descendants, forgetting their great civilization to protect the galaxy from a threat that existed beyond normal space. The last log entry chilled Alex to the bone. It was recorded by someone called the Final Keeper, the last human to remember the truth about their civilization's sacrifice. The message was simple but terrifying. The seals were designed to weaken over time, requiring periodic renewal by humans who had reawakened to their true nature. The time for that renewal was approaching, and the Devourers were beginning to stir in their dimensional prisons. As Alex absorbed this information, he began to notice changes in himself. His understanding of the ancient technology seemed to expand, naturally, as if knowledge buried in his genes was awakening. The facility's systems responded to his thoughts as much as his actions. Most disturbing of all, he began to remember things he had never learned, glimpses of technologies and places that existed only in the ancient records. The archive contained detailed instructions for awakening other humans to their true nature, genetic keys that would unlock the suppressed memories and abilities that lay dormant in human DNA. But the process was dangerous. Many humans wouldn't be able to handle the return of ancestral knowledge, their minds breaking under the weight of millions of years of accumulated wisdom. Alex realized he faced an impossible choice. He could keep the knowledge secret, allowing humanity to remain ignorant while the dimensional seals continued to weaken. Or he could begin the awakening process, knowing that it would transform humanity forever and might drive many of his people insane. The facility's final system was a communication array that could reach every human world simultaneously, broadcasting the genetic activation codes that would begin the awakening. Alex stood before the controls, knowing that activating the system would change not just humanity but the entire galaxy. The other species would finally learn the truth about human origins, about the debt they owed to the civilization they had forgotten. As he reached for the activation switch, Alex felt the weight of galactic history pressing down on him. Somewhere in the darkness between dimensions, ancient enemies were stirring. The seals that had held them for 50,000 years were failing, and the only beings capable of renewing those seals were humans who had voluntarily forgotten how to be anything more than primitive newcomers to the galactic community. The time for forgetting was over. The galaxy needed its guardians to remember who they really were, even if the truth would shatter everything everyone believed about human history. Alex activated the communication array and began broadcasting the awakening signal to every human world in the galaxy. The message spread through galactic communication networks like wildfire, despite every attempt to suppress it. Archaeological teams across 12 species began examining their homeworlds with new eyes, and what they found shattered the foundations of everything they believed about galactic history. Every major city, every sacred site, every monument to ancient achievement had been built on human foundations. On the crystalline world of Mantara, Elder Vreth stood in the heart of their most sacred temple, the monument of first light that marked the beginning of their civilization. The scanning equipment showed what he had feared to discover. The temple's foundation stones bore human construction techniques, built with technologies that predated Mantari evolution by millions of years. The sacred texts that spoke of their species achieving enlightenment through their own wisdom now seemed like the stories children tell themselves to feel important. The revelation hit every species differently, but with equal devastating effect. The Void Runners discovered that their mysterious gift of the stars technology, which had allowed them to achieve spaceflight, was actually reverse-engineered from human artifacts buried on their homeworld. The aquatic depths dwellers found human habitation modules in their deepest ocean trenches, perfectly preserved environmental systems that had been maintaining their world's ecosystem for eons. Most shocking of all was the discovery on Sylvan Prime, the garden world where the plant-like Sylvans had evolved their advanced botanical sciences. Deep beneath their greatest forests lay a vast human agricultural complex, automated systems that had been carefully managing the planet's ecosystem and guiding the Sylvans' evolution toward intelligence. The species that prided themselves on their harmony with nature found out they were essentially a gardening project begun by humans millions of years ago. Trade routes that connected the galaxy suddenly made sense when examined through the lens of human planning. The hyperlane networks followed patterns that optimized not just current galactic politics, but the long-term development of dozens of species. Resources had been distributed across worlds to encourage trade and cooperation between different peoples. Even the basic principles of interstellar law showed human influence, designed to prevent the kind of devastating conflicts that might weaken the galaxy's defenses against external threats. On Earth, the awakening had begun in earnest. Humans across the planet reported dreams of impossible vividness, memories of lives lived on distant worlds among the stars. Military installations detected energy signatures that matched the technology found in the ancient archives. Research facilities found their equipment spontaneously upgrading itself, displaying capabilities that shouldn't exist. Captain Emma Torres of the Earth Defense Force experienced the awakening while commanding the patrol vessel Thunder Bay on a routine mission near the Jupiter defense grid. She had been reviewing standard navigation protocols when her ship's computer suddenly displayed star charts with detail levels that exceeded anything in Earth's databases. The charts showed not just stellar positions but tactical information about defensive installations, resource locations, and strategic choke points throughout the galaxy. Her crew began demonstrating abilities that defied explanation. Her navigation officer, Lieutenant Ross, started plotting courses through hyperspace using principles that weren't in any textbook. The ship's engineer, Sergeant Walsh, modified their engines to achieve efficiency ratings that should have been impossible. Most unsettling of all, Torres found herself understanding alien technologies that Earth scientists were still struggling to comprehend. The changes weren't limited to military personnel. Across Earth's population, humans began awakening to knowledge they had never learned. Farmers found themselves understanding alien agricultural techniques that could triple crop yields. Doctors discovered they could diagnose diseases in non-human patients using medical knowledge that didn't officially exist. Children drew pictures of alien worlds they had never seen, complete with accurate details about atmospheric composition and native life forms. The other species watched these developments with growing alarm. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council became daily occurrences as representatives tried to understand the implications of human awakening. Some species called for immediate action to suppress the human population before they could reclaim their ancient dominance. Others argued for cooperation, recognizing that their entire civilization depended on systems originally built by humans. The debate reached a crisis point when deep space monitoring stations detected anomalous energy readings from the Kepler Nebula. The readings matched theoretical predictions for dimensional instability, the kind of spatial distortions that the ancient human records had described as precursors to devourer manifestation. Whatever the humans had been guarding against for 50,000 years was beginning to stir. Elder Vreth called for a closed session of the council, excluding human representatives for the first time in galactic history. The discussion was heated, with species divided between those who wanted to suppress humanity and those who recognized they might need human knowledge to face the coming crisis. "The humans have been deceiving us for millennia," declared High Admiral Rask of the Void Runners. "They allowed us to believe we were their equals while secretly maintaining control over galactic infrastructure. This is an invasion by stealth, conquest through deception." "They sacrificed their civilization to save us all," countered Bloom Speaker Yelan of the Sylvans. "The records show they voluntarily gave up their dominance to maintain defenses against threats we don't even understand. If these devourers are real, we need human knowledge to survive." The argument was interrupted by emergency alerts from border monitoring stations. 3 separate installations reported contact with objects that didn't register on any known sensors, entities that seemed to consume energy itself. Communication with the monitoring stations cut off abruptly, leaving only readings that showed rapidly expanding zones of empty space where the installations had been. Captain Torres received the alert while her ship was patrolling the outer system. The message was brief but terrifying. Dimensional breach detected in Sector 7. All assets in the area had gone dark. Her newly awakened instincts told her this was what the humans had been preparing for across thousands of generations. She contacted Earth Command, but found herself speaking to officers who were struggling with their own awakening memories. Admiral Kane, the gruff career military man who had commanded Earth's defenses for 20 years, was having visions of galactic wars fought with weapons that bent spacetime itself. His staff was accessing tactical databases that shouldn't exist, preparing for battles against enemies that officially weren't real. The transformation of humanity accelerated as news of the dimensional breach spread. Humans who had lived ordinary lives as farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers began remembering their roles as guardians of galactic civilization. Ancient knowledge surfaced in minds that had never learned it, genetic programming activating after eons of dormancy. But the awakening came with a terrible price. Some humans couldn't handle the return of ancestral memories. Hospitals reported cases of complete mental breakdown as ordinary people tried to process millions of years of accumulated knowledge. Others underwent physical changes as dormant genetic modifications activated, their bodies adapting to handle technologies and environments beyond normal human limits. The galaxy watched in fascination and terror as humanity revealed its true nature. These weren't the primitive newcomers everyone had assumed. They were the descendants of the galaxy's greatest civilization, awakening to reclaim knowledge and responsibilities they had voluntarily forgotten. And as the dimensional breaches continued to expand, it became clear that the galaxy would need every bit of that ancient wisdom to survive what was coming. The other species faced a choice that would define the future of galactic civilization. They could continue to resist human awakening and face the devourers with technology built on foundations they didn't understand, or they could accept that their entire civilization had been built under human guidance and hope that their former teachers could save them from threats beyond normal space. The first entity emerged from the dimensional breach in the Kepler Nebula like darkness given form, a writhing mass of void that consumed light itself. Fleet Admiral Corvin of the Mantari Battle Group witnessed its arrival through quantum sensors that struggled to process what they were seeing. The creature wasn't simply dark. It was the absence of existence itself, a hole in reality that grew larger as it fed. The Mantari had assembled their finest warships to investigate the dimensional disturbance. 36 vessels equipped with the most advanced weapons in their arsenal. Corvin had commanded fleets for 50 years and had never encountered an enemy that couldn't be understood through conventional military analysis. The thing emerging from the breach defied every principle of warfare he knew. All ships, maintain formation and prepare for first contact protocols, Corvin ordered, though his crystalline voice carried uncertainty. The protocols had been designed for meetings with unknown but presumably rational species. Nothing in military doctrine covered what to do when facing something that appeared to be eating space itself. The Devourer expanded as they watched, growing, from the size of a fighter craft to something that dwarfed their largest battleships. It moved without propulsion, simply existing in new locations as if distance meant nothing to it. Sensor readings showed that wherever the entity passed, matter ceased to exist. Not destroyed or converted to energy, but simply removed from reality as if it had never been. Admiral, we're detecting more breaches opening throughout the nebula, reported his tactical officer. 17 additional entities have emerged, all showing the same impossible readings. Corvin made the decision that seemed logical at the ideal time. His fleet possessed weapons that could shatter moons and energy shields that had never failed in battle. Surely concentrated firepower from 36 warships would be sufficient to destroy, or at least damage these mysterious entities. All ships, target the largest entity and fire at will. The combined firepower of the Mantari battle group lit up space with destructive energy that should have vaporized anything in its path. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, quantum torpedoes that could crack planetary cores, and energy beams that operated at temperatures exceeding stellar fusion struck the Devourer simultaneously. The entity absorbed every attack without apparent effect. The devastating weapons fire simply vanished into its darkness, consumed as completely as matter and energy. The Devourer then began to move toward the fleet with purpose that suggested intelligence. What followed could barely be called a battle. The Mantari warships fought with desperation as their enemy demonstrated abilities that violated the fundamental laws of physics. The Devourer passed through their energy shields as if they didn't exist, its touch causing entire sections of ships to simply cease. Hull armor that could withstand stellar radiation crumbled at the entity's approach. Crew members vanished without trace, not killed but removed from existence entirely. Admiral Corvin's flagship lasted longest, its experimental quantum barriers providing momentary protection. But even those ultimate defenses failed as the Devourer demonstrated that it could consume the very forces that held matter together. Corvin's last transmission reached Galactic Command as his ship was being systematically erased from reality. This is Admiral Corvin to all stations. The entities cannot be fought with conventional weapons. They consume everything they touch. Send word to the humans. If their ancient records speak truth, they are our only hope. Tell them the seals have failed and the Devourers have returned. The message reached Earth as Captain Emma Torres was reviewing tactical assessments of the dimensional breaches. Her awakening memories provided context that made the situation even more terrifying than the Galactic Council realized. The Devourers weren't just alien invaders from another dimension. They were entropy itself, given purpose, the ultimate enemy of organized reality. The ancient human records contained detailed descriptions of the entities and their capabilities. They existed partially outside normal space-time, making them immune to conventional weapons while allowing them to manipulate reality according to their hunger. They consumed not just matter and energy, but information itself, erasing the patterns that defined existence. A world touched by Devourers didn't just die, it was removed from history as if it had never been. Torres found herself accessing strategic knowledge that felt both foreign and familiar. Plans developed over millennia of warfare against an enemy that couldn't be destroyed through normal means. The humans had learned to fight the Devourers using weapons that operated on the same principles as the entities themselves. Technology that required understanding of physics beyond what current galactic science could grasp. Across Earth, the awakening accelerated as humanity faced its ancient purpose. Military installations that had housed standard defensive weapons revealed hidden chambers containing devices that defied explanation. Ships that had seemed normally equipped manifested weapon systems that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Human personnel began demonstrating abilities that allowed them to perceive and interact with forces beyond normal spacetime. Dr. Alex Reed worked frantically at the Ashara facility, accessing archived battle plans that showed how the original war had been fought. The humans had developed tactics that required precise coordination across multiple dimensions, using weapons that could target the conceptual foundations of reality itself. But the technology was dangerous even to its users, requiring mental and physical modifications that pushed human evolution to its limits. The Devourers feed on organized existence, Alex explained to the Emergency Council of Awakened Humans that had formed on Earth. They're attracted to complex structures, advanced civilizations, and high-energy phenomena. Our ancestors learned to fight them by becoming partially entropic themselves, using weapons that operated on the edge of dissolution. The transformation of human forces was dramatic and disturbing to witness. Soldiers who had been ordinary people days before now wielded weapons that existed in 12 dimensions at once. Engineers modified ships to phase between parallel realities, making them difficult for Devourers to target. Most shocking of all, some humans began undergoing physical changes that allowed them to exist partially outside normal spacetime, becoming able to engage the entities on their own terms. But the cost was enormous. Many humans couldn't handle the modifications required to fight interdimensional entities, their minds fragmented under the pressure of perceiving reality from perspectives that transcended individual consciousness. Others underwent physical changes that made them no longer entirely human, their bodies adapting to survive in conditions that would destroy normal matter. The second wave of Devourer manifestations confirmed humanity's worst fears. The entities emerged simultaneously in 17 different star systems, suggesting coordinated intelligence rather than random dimensional instability. Each breach disgorged dozens of Devourers that immediately began consuming everything in their vicinity. Planets died not through destruction but through complete erasure, removed from existence so thoroughly that even their gravitational effects disappeared. The Galactic Council's response fleet suffered the same fate as Admiral Corvin's battle group. The Void Runners lost entire armadas to entities that consumed their ships from the inside out. The Sylvans watched helplessly as their garden worlds were stripped of existence layer by layer. Species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia found themselves completely helpless against enemies that operated beyond their understanding of reality. Only the human forces showed any effectiveness against the Devourers. Captain Torres led the first successful engagement, using tactics that required her ship to exist in multiple dimensions while firing weapons that targeted the conceptual structure of the entities themselves. The battle was won, but at the cost of half her crew's sanity and permanent alterations to their ship that made it only partially real. As more Devourers emerged from expanding breaches, it became clear that the galaxy faced extinction unless humanity could fully reclaim its ancient role as guardians of reality. But the price of that reclamation was the transformation of humanity into something that might no longer deserve the name human. The species that had sacrificed their civilization to save the galaxy 50,000 years ago now faced the choice of sacrificing their humanity to do it again. The final battle began not with armies clashing in space, but with humanity reaching across dimensions to engage enemies that existed partially outside reality itself. Captain Emma Torres stood on the bridge of her transformed ship, the Thunder Bay, which now existed simultaneously in 12 parallel dimensions. Her crew had undergone changes that made them barely recognizable as the people they had been weeks before. Their consciousness expanded to perceive threats that operated beyond normal spacetime. The Devourers had established beachheads in 47 star systems, creating expanding zones of dissolution where reality itself was being consumed. Traditional galactic civilization had collapsed as species that had ruled for millennia found themselves utterly helpless against entities that could erase matter, energy, and information with equal ease. Only humanity possessed the knowledge and capability to fight on the Devourers' level. But the cost of that capability was transforming them into something that might no longer qualify as human. Dr. Alex Reed coordinated the defense from the Ashara facility, which had revealed itself to be far more than an ancient archive. The installation was actually a dimensional fortress, a command center that existed across multiple layers of reality simultaneously. From here, he could perceive the true scope of the Devourer invasion, seeing how the entities moved through dimensional space to attack reality from angles that three-dimensional beings couldn't comprehend. The human response required tactics that defied conventional understanding of warfare. Ships phased between parallel universes to attack Devourers from dimensions the entities couldn't fully access. Weapons that existed as pure concept rather than physical objects struck at the mathematical foundations that allowed the entities to maintain coherence. Human soldiers underwent modifications that allowed them to think in non-linear time, coordinating attacks across multiple probability streams simultaneously. The most disturbing aspect of the campaign was what it was doing to humanity itself. The genetic modifications required to fight interdimensional entities pushed human evolution beyond recognition. Some humans developed the ability to perceive all possible futures simultaneously, becoming living probability calculators who could predict devourer movements with perfect accuracy. Others learned to exist as distributed consciousness, their minds spread across multiple bodies to prevent total erasure if the devourers consumed their primary form. The battle for the Kepler Nebula showcased both humanity's evolved capabilities and the terrible price of their transformation. Captain Torres led a fleet of ships that existed in quantum superposition, simultaneously present and absent, until the moment of attack. Her forces engaged devourers that had grown to planetary scale, entities that consumed entire star systems, while existing partially outside the space they were destroying. The weapons humanity employed operated on principles that current galactic science couldn't comprehend. Entropy cannons that fired concentrated dissolution at targets, reality anchors that prevented devourers from phasing out of normal space, conceptual minds that exploded into pure negation, creating zones where existence itself became unstable. The battle was won, but the victory came at the cost of fundamental changes to local spacetime that would affect the region for millions of years. As the war progressed, humanity faced the same choice their ancestors had confronted 50,000 years earlier. They possessed the power to permanently seal the dimensional rifts and prevent future devourer incursions, but doing so required a sacrifice that would reshape their entire species. The sealing process demanded that humans maintain a continuous vigil across multiple dimensions, becoming eternal guardians of reality itself. The debate raged across human space as the species struggled with their destiny. Some argued that they had earned the right to claim their place as the galaxy's dominant power, using their advanced knowledge to rule over the species they had saved. They pointed out that the other races had lived comfortable lives for millennia, while humanity bore the hidden burden of defending reality itself. Others insisted that power inevitably corrupted, that becoming the galaxy's rulers would eventually transform humanity into the kind of tyrants they had once fought against. They argued for repeating their ancestors' sacrifice, returning to apparent primitiveness while maintaining their vigil against threats from beyond normal space. The decision was forced by the emergence of a devourer lord, an entity of such massive scale and power that it threatened to consume entire galactic regions. The creature existed across 17 dimensions simultaneously, and possessed intelligence that allowed it to adapt to human tactics in real time. Conventional weapons, even the advanced interdimensional armaments humanity had developed, proved insufficient against something that could modify its own fundamental nature. Dr. Alex Reed realized that defeating the Devourer Lord required humanity to transcend their current limitations entirely. The process would transform them into beings of pure consciousness, entities capable of existing as living concepts rather than physical forms. They would become the galaxy's immune system, spreading through dimensional space to identify and neutralize threats before they could manifest in normal reality. The transformation began with volunteers from Earth's most modified populations, humans who had already undergone extensive alterations to fight the Devourers. They underwent a process that dissolved the boundaries between individual consciousness and cosmic awareness, becoming distributed entities that existed across multiple layers of reality simultaneously. The volunteers retained their essential humanity while gaining capabilities that allowed them to engage threats on a conceptual level. The battle against the Devourer Lord took place across dimensions that most beings couldn't perceive, a conflict between the forces of organized existence and primordial entropy. Humanity's transformed guardians engaged the entity using tactics that involved rewriting the mathematical foundations of local reality, creating zones where the Devourer's dissolution abilities were neutralized by pure creative force. The victory was absolute but Pyrrhic. The Devourer Lord was not destroyed but contained, sealed away in dimensional prison that required constant maintenance by humanity's transformed guardians. The sealing process closed all dimensional rifts permanently, preventing future Devourer incursions, but also cutting off entire areas of scientific advancement that depended on interdimensional research. Humanity faced its final choice as the immediate crisis ended. They could retain their transcendent abilities and rule over a galaxy that owed them everything, or they could choose the path of sacrifice once again. The decision would determine not just humanity's future, but the nature of galactic civilization itself. Captain Torres, now existing as a hybrid of flesh and living concept, stood before the assembled human council, her consciousness extended across 17 star systems, allowing her to perceive the full scope of what humanity had become. Some humans had transformed so completely that they barely registered as individual entities. Their awareness merged with the dimensional barriers they maintained. Others had retained enough physical form to interact with normal space, while wielding powers that could reshape reality itself. "We have the strength to claim our rightful place," argued Commander Walsh, whose modifications had given him the ability to exist as pure information when necessary. "The galaxy depends on systems we built, follows laws we established, uses technology we developed. We've saved them twice now from extinction. Why should we hide our nature and pretend to be primitives?" The counter-argument came from Dr. Reed, whose consciousness now extended throughout the Ashara facility's dimensional network. "Power corrupts even the best intentions. Our ancestors understood this when they chose to forget their greatness. If we become the galaxy's rulers, how long before we see other species as children to be managed rather than equals to be respected?" The debate continued for days, with humanity's transformed representatives weighing the burden of eternal vigilance against the temptation of acknowledged supremacy. Meanwhile, the other galactic species waited anxiously for humanity's decision, knowing that their future depended entirely on choices being made by beings they had underestimated for thousands of years. The deciding factor came from an unexpected source. The youngest members of humanity's transformation, children who had undergone the modifications necessary to perceive dimensional threats, offered a perspective that their elders had missed. They pointed out that the choice between ruling and hiding was a false dilemma, that there was a third path that honored both humanity's capabilities and their values. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Humanity would remember their true nature and maintain their vigil against dimensional threats, but they would do so as equals rather than rulers. They would share their knowledge gradually, helping other species develop their own understanding of advanced physics and dimensional science. Most importantly, they would ensure that no single species, including themselves, ever again possessed the power to dominate galactic civilization. The implementation required sacrifices from all involved. Humanity's most transformed individuals would maintain the dimensional seals and watch for signs of new threats, existing primarily as consciousness distributed across multiple layers of reality. But they would also work to train representatives from other species, gradually sharing the burden of cosmic guardianship across the galaxy's diverse populations. The process began with the establishment of joint research facilities, where human knowledge could be carefully shared with alien scientists. The Mantari proved surprisingly adept at understanding dimensional physics once they moved beyond their crystalline thought patterns. The Sylvans' natural connection to living systems made them ideal candidates for maintaining the biological components of the dimensional barriers. Even the Void Runners, despite their initial hostility, demonstrated valuable insights into the manipulation of empty space, Captain Torres took on the role of humanity's primary ambassador to the other species, her hybrid nature allowing her to interact with both normal beings and the transformed guardians who watched the dimensional barriers. She worked to establish protocols for galactic defense that didn't depend solely on human capabilities, ensuring that future threats would be met by a truly cooperative response. The transformation of galactic society took decades to complete. Old prejudices died hard, and many species struggled to accept that the humans they had dismissed as primitives were actually their civilization's founders and protectors. But gradually, a new understanding emerged based on mutual respect rather than hidden patronage. Earth itself became a symbol of humanity's chosen path. The planet retained its appearance as a relatively primitive world, but visitors who looked closely would notice subtle signs of advanced technology integrated seamlessly into natural systems. Cities that seemed built with simple materials actually incorporated dimensional stabilization systems. Forests that appeared entirely natural included monitoring equipment that watched for signs of interdimensional instability. The human population reflected their species' dual nature. Most lived normal lives, indistinguishable from the primitive colonists that other species remembered. But scattered among them were individuals whose modifications allowed them to perceive threats from beyond normal space, ready to respond if the dimensional barriers ever showed signs of failure. The galaxy's new equilibrium represented humanity's greatest achievement. They had found a way to fulfill their role as cosmic guardians without dominating the species they protected. The knowledge that had been hidden for 50,000 years was gradually shared, but in ways that empowered others rather than creating dependency. Children throughout the galaxy grew up learning that their civilization had been built on foundations laid by humanity's ancient sacrifice, but also that the future would be shaped by cooperation between all species. The old hierarchies based on assumed superiority gave way to partnerships based on complementary strengths and shared responsibility. As decades turned to centuries, the galaxy flourished under its new understanding. Scientific advancement accelerated as species learned to combine their unique perspectives with human dimensional knowledge. Art and culture experienced a renaissance as beings began to truly understand the scope of their shared history. Most importantly, the watch against dimensional threats became a truly galactic responsibility, rather than humanity's burden alone. The story ended where it began, with discovery and wonder, but now the amazement came from understanding rather than ignorance. New archaeological expeditions found evidence of humanity's ancient civilization on every settled world. But now these discoveries were celebrated rather than hidden. They served as reminders of the price of greatness and the value of humility, lessons that would guide galactic civilization for eons to come. In the deepest dimensional layers where the most transformed humans maintained their eternal vigil, consciousness that had once been Captain Torres and Dr. Reed and thousands of others watched over reality itself. They were no longer fully human in any biological sense, but they retained the essential human values that had driven their ancestors to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The galaxy was safe, not because humanity ruled over it, but because they had chosen to serve it. The ancient race that the galaxy had tried to forget had remembered themselves without forgetting their compassion, becoming guardians who protected from the shadows while ensuring that all species could reach for the light of their own potential.